So you're new to fantasy basketball. Somebody sent you an invite, you follow the link, you create your team name, you even check out a custom logo, and then you realize, just like fantasy football, there are different formats in fantasy basketball. In this episode, my special guest is about to put you onto game and give you everything you need to know about Roto leagues in fantasy basketball. We believe every NBA fan who plays fantasy football should also play fantasy basketball. Dan Bespris is one of my favorite fantasy basketball analysts. He has a voice that cuts through speakers with elite ninja level value and precision. He is the assistant general manager and director of multimedia sales at Sports Ethos and the host of one of my favorite shows, the Fantasy NBA Today podcast. Ladies and gentlemen and ladies, my man Dan Bespris is in the Believe in Fantasy portal. Let's do it. What's up, Dan?
That was the kind of intro you dream of, man. That was incredible. There's no chance I live up to the things you just said.
You gotta take me with you, and when you walk in a room, I'll just be like, Dan Bespris, the ninja.
That would be amazing if I ever left home. So the only rate limiting step is I never leave this place. The kids go, the kids come back, and I yell about fantasy basketball in between.
Very nice. Well, I want to hear all about that, but before we do that, we got to get into this value, Dan. So I just want to jump right into Roto. You cool with that?
Absolutely. I want to try to convert as many people as I can, with the caveat that I understand people have a love of head-to-head basketball because they get to beat their friends up on a week-to-week basis. But I want to talk to everybody who values, and this is going to sound very Scrooge McDucky of me, but who values the money at the end of the year. That's what Roto is to me, and I'm ready to explain it in whatever order you think is best here.
Let's do it. So let's go to the basics, basic level. What is a Roto league, and how is it different from the other formats, and why should fantasy managers join one?
All right, so the key about Roto, and I don't know if I'm doing the right sales pitch here, but it's the one I'm going to do, is it's very math heavy. It's an entire season of stats all accruing at the same time. So you're not in a week-to-week battle against some other team where the random fluctuations of your team's free throw, like we've all had a season or a week even where we have DeMar DeRozan and Jimmy Butler or whatever on your team, and you're like, I'm just going to win free throws every week. But for whatever reason, there's 1 week in January every year where both of those guys go 6 for 18. It doesn't make any sense. And suddenly this team, you lose a valuable week. That you don't have to worry about in Roto, because what matters is what these players do over the course of an entire season. You are not subject to variability in the same way. And perhaps my best argument of all on the Roto side, in addition to I just love seeing stats count over an entire year, is your league will not be determined by weird playoff rest days. And I always tell the same story. I had this team in a head-to-head league where Trae Young was sort of the focal point of that team. And I don't think he maybe missed 2 games the entire season. And then in my fantasy playoff semifinals, turned an ankle, missed 2 games. He was back immediately the next week because he's unbelievably durable and he plays through everything. But he skipped 2 games and my team fell apart because I needed the guy that my team was built around. That type of stuff doesn't matter in a Roto league because everything that he did in the 77 or 78 games he played that year all still counts towards your final numbers. There's so much strategy to it. The season is long, so you have all this time to make tweaks. Trading is really easy, I find, in Roto because you're attacking specific things. In a way, on the head-to-head side, nobody trusts each other, so trades don't happen as often. So come with me. Join me in Roto fandom. Come with me. Let your stats accrue for an entire season. You're battling everyone all at the same time, and the best team truly does win the pot at the end of the year. I love it. I hate that my leagues are constantly decided on the head-to-head side by random luck. I want my leagues decided by who does the best stuff all season long. Drafting, pickups, all that. That's Roto.
So talk to me about the progression of a player. So someone comes over from fantasy football, they start off in a points league. then they get a little more, skilled, then they go to a category. Do you think that Roto is the next step, or those points players maybe should jump into a Roto before category?
I think you can make the leap. I feel like the discrepancies, the jump there is kind of the same either way. Like going from one format to another, you're going to have to learn a new way of playing regardless. So if you're jumping from points just straight to category and you're still in the weekly matchup stuff, just take the whole plunge all at once. Because in my mind, Roto is actually easier once you kind of get used to it, and it'll probably take 2 or 3 months of tweaking and figuring things out. Or if you want to do a couple of free leagues or one free league in the background while you're still doing all your other stuff, there is a learning curve to it. But in my eyes, I don't think there's a reason to spend a whole year learning how to do a category head-to-head league and then spend another season figuring out how to translate that to Roto. If you go back far enough, Roto is the original type of fantasy sports. It was a fantasy baseball game, to be like, if you go far enough back. And I get it, baseball is a league where everybody's thinking about how many home runs you hit over a season, how many RBIs you hit over a season. So that made sense over 162 games. In a way, with football, maybe it didn't make the most sense because football, there are more games, but a couple of years ago, there was one fewer, and there is a lot of that luck, no matter what format you're in. So week to week, month to month, whatever, it's not quite the same thing. Basketball, there are enough games. There's 82 games in a damn season. You don't need the little 3-game blip window of the week to week. Take the original game from baseball, port that over to basketball, figure it out over a few months, just the way I did the first time I did a Roto League. And I don't know. I don't think people are ever going back right now because head-to-head, until we figure out how to fix every week after the NBA All-Star break, head-to-head's kind of broken right now.
Interesting take. Why? Why do you say that? Dan, it's because of the there's less games, and then you kind of have to balance it out. Why is it broken? Because I believe we are like, we've adjusted, and we're like, not just adjusted, but we're also like immune to it now. It's like we know it's gonna be all screwed up, and we've accepted it.
Yeah, I can't accept it. I can't accept it. And I feel like every year more people are deciding just not to play fantasy sports because they hate the way it ends. And I hear these arguments that are like, oh, well, it's like the real playoffs. If your guy misses a couple of games, you lose. Yeah, but the fantasy playoffs are not like the real playoffs, because in the real playoffs, guys play through tweaked ankles and sore backs and whatever, jammed finger that they've got going on, where in March, guys decidedly don't. That's the time of the year where they're pushing the least hard outside of the 6 teams that are fighting for the last play-in or playoff spot. Everybody else is coasting. That's not like the real playoffs. The fantasy playoffs parallel the least competitive time in the fantasy or in the reality regular season, I guess I should say. So yes, a couple of tweaks you can make, end your season sooner on the head-to-head side. That helps a lot. But now all of a sudden you have like a 17-week regular season. Are you really getting an accurate assessment of where teams belong? You kind of have no choice. That's like the only thing you can do on the head-to-head side now. You can try to make playoff weeks longer. You can create weekly games cap limits on head-to-head so zeros don't hurt you as much. Or you can just try a Roto League. Instead of doing 900 things to try to fix your head-to-head league, there's another type of league that's out there that's already ready to go for you where this stuff doesn't impact it. I'm going to continue to do a couple of head-to-head leagues. You kind of have to, and everybody's got like their boys from way back where you've got to play the league with them. But I hate the experience now. And I just, like, we're going to keep doing tweaks. We're going to keep trying to fix it. But ultimately, Roto is the fairer league. And if you got a decent chunk of money on the line, you want the winner to be someone who wins it in a fair way. That's my take on Roto, and hopefully that's enough to convince a few people.
Man, well, I am going to be looking for a Roto League. So let's say I'm deciding that I'm going to jump in. I need some practical advice now, Dan. Can you help me with some key draft strategies for building a well-rounded team in Roto?
Yeah, so a couple of things there. One of them, and this is actually a question that I'm jumping the gun a bit because I know it's actually on your list of questions for today, but I'm going to answer it as part of this one. In Roto, because injuries don't hurt you quite the same way, because typically if you're in a Roto league, You also have a limit on how many games you can play. It eliminates the necessity for folks to be streaming guys every single day. Your advantage is built on how good your key players are. So that allows you to draft slightly riskier players with the potential to be better on a game-to-game basis. And it's this hard thing to explain without getting pretty far into the weeds. And I don't want to slam everybody over the head with this, with the deep rough, to use a golf analogy here. But someone like a Kawhi Leonard is a really good example of a player that in head-to-head leagues is avoided like the plague, because you just don't want to have a guy who sits out a game. And you know, if a back-to-back's coming up, he's missing one of them. So just accommodate that. But basically, if you got like a 19, 20-week regular season, you assume Kawhi Leonard is missing one game every single week. And he's not going to fit on an IL slot in the traditional sense. You can probably drop him into IL plus if your league has that. But if they don't, you're stuck sitting on Kawhi zeros every single week. In Roto, the beauty of a games cap is that you drop Kawhi in for his 60 games or 62 games or whatever it is of hyper elite production that you're drafting in the early third round this year, and you can make up the games he misses. He misses a game in January. You can drop a player into your lineup in March to cover up that lost game, basically, in a way where with head-to-head, at the end of a week, at the end of that night, in fact, if a player misses a game, you can't make up for it. It's just a zero, and you're going to have a tougher time winning that week. In Roto, you can go back, you can find somebody that's hot off the wire. You can pick up a Kawhi Leonard replacement if you wanted to and drop him into the mix. There's all these ways to accommodate missed games. And so in Roto, I think that actually expands the draft board, which is, in my estimation, more fun. More players are actually available to you if you want to draft them. Do you love Jimmy Butler? Do you love Anthony Davis? Do you love Kristaps Porzingis? I don't know who people like to have on their team. These are guys that on the head-to-head side generally get drafted super late or not at all. And in Roto, you're hunting that per game upside because a missed game doesn't hurt you all that much. Another quick tenet on Roto and how to succeed at it is understanding that the season is extraordinarily long. You want the maximum value per game, but you don't have to race all your guys out there. Don't start 13, 14 dudes at the beginning of the year. Start your best guys. Start your best 8 or 9 players. See what everybody else in the league is doing. You have 6 months to make up ground in games played, in attacking categories as the year goes on. Third thing, and then I'm going to stop monologuing here. You asked about building a well-rounded team. That is one of the strategic elements that I think does take getting used to for folks jumping over to Roto, where in head-to-head, if in the middle of a draft you realize you have a team that's extraordinary in 5 or 6 categories, on the head-to-head side, you'll often just keep drafting into those categories and lean into it to build a juggernaut in 6 categories. In Roto, you got to be good in at least 7 to win. Probably 8. You're not going to be great in all 9. That's kind of impossible unless you're in a league with a bunch of people who've never played before and you're just boat racing them. You can punt. I wouldn't strongly recommend it on draft day, but in Roto, you do have to be a little bit more aware as you're moving through, not necessarily the draft, but through the season, that you can't just blow everybody away in 5 categories, because the best you can do in them is 12 Roto points. And you need to find a way to get points in the other categories as well, via trade, via draft picks, whatever. Roll that all together, bigger draft board, more fun, more time to mess with it. You don't have to end your league early. I think these are the ways that you can succeed in Roto as you're in sort of the getting used to it process.
That's good. You talked about being able to grab injured players. That's one thing that I've struggled with in fantasy, is like those guys, the Kawhis, the Jimmy Butlers, guys who are going to play 50 games. Even LeBron now, right? Like, I think in the last 3 years, he's averaged 50-something games. So talk to me about bench management in Roto leagues and some tips on how we can maximize our bench's impact.
So the best way to think about this is to find out what your Roto league's game cap is set at. The Yahoo default is 82 per position. So 82 times 10 starting slots gets you to about 820. If you, and this again, we're getting to the math a little bit. If you assume that most basketball players right now, most of the fantasy relevant players are playing about 68, 69 ball games a year, your starting 10 gets you to a little under 700 of your 820 games played. So think of it this way. You need about 11 and a half current fantasy basketball full season's worth of games. So you don't need to use your entire bench. You can use your starting 9 or 10. You can rotate interesting players in and out of your bench, and that's how you get to that game's cap. But in terms of how best to utilize that bench, the best way is to be constantly hunting for players with a per game ability in the 75 range or better. It's easier said than done, but that actually means it's okay if you don't start your whole lineup for a few days or a week or a couple of weeks while you're looking for that hot streamer that you can drop in and they'll roll at a top 75 clip for 2-3 days, whatever it turns out to be, or even if it's 5-10 games, something like that. So the real key in Roto is using your games cap and playing the guys that have the best per game potential, as opposed to the guys like, and I pick on Harrison Barnes. He's always the example I use here. I don't know why I pick on Harrison Barnes. He's always like in a top 120 range, quietly plodding along, playing 75 to 80 games a year, very durable, not useful in Roto. I don't want to spend a games cap on somebody who's a top 125 type of player. I'd rather cast that player off into the waiver wire ocean and just be hunting anyone at all, night to night, every day. Hunt the guy that can give you that powerhouse game, get him into your games cap, throw that on top of the guys that you trust every single night to go out there and play really well. And that's how you use your bench. That's how you rack up the most stats using the fewest games possible.
Man, I love that you're like hunting. Like once we start talking about hunting in fantasy sports, I get very excited because it's that kind of feeling, right? It's like you're searching and trying to find and get ahead of the competition. So that's really, really good. Talk to me about mistakes or misconceptions that fantasy basketball managers make when they participate in Roto leagues, and how can folks avoid that?
Yeah, the things I've heard the most and why people are, I think, perhaps a bit reticent to jump into the Roto pool. Number one is they miss the fantasy playoffs. And unfortunately, Roto does not have that. So there isn't really a thing I can say that magically makes that better, other than if you want to be a team that's playing hard and playing well all year, and that to basically guarantee you win some money in your fantasy league, that's my sales pitch there. You're more likely to win money with a good team in a Roto league than you are in a head-to-head, because you do eliminate the variability, the luck element at the end of it. But yeah, there isn't that stomach turning into knots playoff and just praying your guys stay healthy for 1 week kind of thing. So if you love that part, okay, there isn't a whole lot I can do about that. The other thing I hear a lot about Roto is that teams give up by the halfway point if they're down near the bottom of the standings, which I would actually say is quite the opposite scenario, where on head-to-head, if you're at the bottom of the standings, I think the point people are trying to convince me of is that, they can try to hunt the 6th seed. They can try to get just into the playoffs, and then anything can happen, which I get it. But if you're at the bottom of your head-to-head league, how many times have you really made a run at the 6th seed and then won anything? It's extraordinarily slim. The way you come back in a Roto league is just the simple understanding that it is a very long season. Your Roto league goes to the very last day of the regular season. So you have a truckload of time to make things up, make shrewd trades. Are you at the bottom of your league in standings because other teams have played more games than you? Be aware of why you are where you are. And in fact, for me, I actually like to sit at the bottom of the standings after a month or two in my Roto league. I like to lag back 15, 20, 25 games, see what everybody else is doing, and that allows me to attack different categories as the season goes on. Hey, here's a place that I can gain 2 or 3 Roto points in rebounds with just the tiniest little adjustment. I love this story. It was, and now I honestly don't remember how many years ago it was, because since COVID, I can't track time anymore. It was something like, I think 4 or 5 years ago, I had a really good Roto team, and I think I was in 2nd or 3rd place, and it was coming down to the wire. And because I was about 10, 15 games behind the other teams around me, I was able to see that I could gain 2 points in rebounds in just a very small tweak to my strategy. Even though it looked like I was, 150, 180 rebounds behind these other clubs, in reality, if I just started to average an extra like 2 to 3 rebounds a week from different roster spots, I could jump those dudes as the season progressed. And so there was a stretch in March where I sat Damian Lillard in favor of Patrick Beverley just because I needed the extra like 9 rebounds per week for 2 or 3 weeks in a row. And I gained those rebound points. And on the very last day of the regular season, because I ran the math out perfectly, I jumped over 2 teams from third to first and I won it. It was one of the greatest feelings because to go from winning like $150 to like 900 in one afternoon was incredible. So the season is not over in Roto. If you're near the bottom, I would argue you have a better chance to get back into contention. And another nice thing about Roto is you can split the pot a little bit more evenly, where with head-to-head, nobody wants third and fourth place teams taking money because then they screw up the waiver wire situation for the teams fighting for first and second. In Roto, you can pay out first through fourth, and that gets everybody playing until the end of the regular season, or at least until the last week or two, which, again, that's not any different than head-to-head because your playoffs start 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks to go. Teams are done by the end of February anyway. That's not different in Roto versus head-to-head. So that, to me, hopefully I can knock down some of the objections to at least trying the Roto side. Those are the things that I hear people complain about, and those are, well, at least for some of that, I guess. Some of that, those are explanations to how you can avoid that.
Very dope. I love the story too. Really good stuff, inspiring stuff, because that's one thing I don't think we do enough of in the space. I don't hear enough stories of people's like league journeys. It's a lot of data, information, advice, but the stories, maybe sometimes in the off season we get more stories, but that's really dope. I might repurpose that as its own standalone video, Dan. I'm gonna quickly pay some bills, but stick around because Dan is gonna share some very, very interesting players that you might want to target this year. This episode is presented to you by BetOnline. Football is back, and BetOnline is your #1 information source for all your sports wagering info with all the up-to-the-minute stats, news, scores, and matchup breakdowns. Get the latest game odds, spreads, and totals from the NFL and college football at your fingertips with BetOnline's real-time updates on statistics, news, and odds. From week 1 all the way to the college football playoff and Super Bowl, BetOnline gives you access to the best football promotions and contests available anywhere online. Head to the website today and use your mobile device to get in on the action. Remember, use the promo code BELIEVE to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. So, Dan, this is where they get out their pens and papers. This is where you drop those gems. Can you share a few players that you're targeting in Roto this season?
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought about this because, again, you let me know that this question was coming, and I thought it might be interesting to tailor the answer more towards the front and middle of drafts, because I actually think the back end of drafts is where head-to-head and Roto strategy kind of comes together. Like once you get past pick, I don't know what it is this season. It fluctuates by 10, 15 slots per year, but it's probably after like pick 95 or 105 range. Head-to-head or Roto, you're shooting for all upside at that point. Because again, with head-to-head, like who cares if you get some trudging player at the end? That's a player you're going to turn into a streaming slot anyway. And then with Roto, there's just no advantage to having somebody who's a low-end plodder type. Where I think the difference is between head-to-head and Roto in how we target players is really through the top 75. And even if you really wanted to get down to it, it's like through the top 60, because that's where you can increase your risk factor on the game's missed side in Roto in a way that you just can't do in head-to-head. But at the same time, on the Roto side, you're also targeting players that you know have a more robust fantasy stat set. What I mean by that, and again, apologies for really getting deep into the weeds on this side of thing, is Luka Doncic is a wonderful example of a player that makes way more sense on the head-to-head side than on the Roto side. So I know you asked me about players that I am targeting in Roto, and the first example I'm giving is someone who I'm not. Luka is great to build a head-to-head team around because he's hyper elite in points excellent in threes, very good in rebounding, particularly from a guard position, very good in assists. Steals are solid. Even the field goal percent for Luka is pretty good for a guard. And then turnovers, free throw percent are quite bad for him. And that's the type of player you're looking for in head-to-head. You want somebody that's giving you big, big, big advantages in 4, 5, 6 categories, and you don't care how bad they are in a couple of other ones because you'll just build around what they're good at. So on the Roto side, that's the kind of player that actually hurts you more than he helps in a lot of ways, where you want to make sure that you're as good as possible in as many categories as possible. So it's much better to start your draft by building around someone who has a more well-rounded stat set. So what I'm looking at is, and we'll start at the very top. If Luka's a player that I think is not a particularly good fit on the Roto side, guys near the top that I think are falling too far on the Roto side, someone like a Kyrie Irving is actually a really good example of this. Now, Yahoo has messed with me lately by moving him. His pre-rank was like 13, 14 3 weeks ago, and they moved him up to 8 on their most recent board. But everybody still hates him on the head-to-head side, so he's still going to likely be the value in Roto. He's a guy who plays in the mid-60s in games in a good situation, but he's good at scoring, good at threes, fine at rebounding, decent at assists, good at steals, good at blocks for a guard, good field goal percent, great free throw percent. Turnovers are not all that high. You're getting someone who is average to good in almost every category right out of the chute, and you're typically able to get him a half round to a round later because it's a Roto league, because you can work around that kind of thing. So that's the first example I wanted to give of guys near the top that maybe it doesn't make sense to folks that play a lot of head-to-head, but Kyrie's a guy who's getting drafted a little bit too late right now, and Luka for Roto, I want to make that very specific, is a guy who's getting drafted a little bit too early. Similarly, as we move through and there's kind of this overarching theme that I want to use, and it seems like maybe my webcam is on the fritz right now, so I want to apologize if that's happening, and I'll just go to audio only. Can you still hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Was the webcam freaking out like I saw?
It was total. I thought it was poltergeist.
Yeah, that's the second time that's happened with my new computer, and I'm really upset about that. So I'm sorry to all of your viewers and listeners. I figured they'd probably rather just listen than see that thing freaking out on their screen.
It's all good.
I don't know what happened there. That's incredibly unprofessional. I'm going to do the tech savvy thing and unplug it and replug it in between shows today and see if that does the trick. But anyway, so just thinking again about how this strategically makes sense. Who do you target in Roto? Who do you not target? You're avoiding the guys that have obvious detriments in their fantasy game. And you're targeting the guys that don't have that big drop in stuff. And so for Roto, oftentimes the guys that end up being really good values are either A, the guys that are hurt a little bit more than your average player, or B, guys who are good in the categories that head-to-head players often ignore, which would be turnovers, field goal percent, and free throw percent. And the percentages are the ones that I think stand out the most in that. So let's get into the specifics a little bit more because I've monologued on strategy too much in this one. So Kyrie's a guy on the good side. Luka's a guy kind of on the wrong side of that. As you move your way through the first couple of rounds, I think a couple other guys that I am targeting in Roto are guys like Kevin Durant and Anthony Davis, guys that are injury fears, but when they're upright, are top 5 per game players. And right now, with the way the board is built, you actually might be able to get both of them, which is absurd in Roto. To be able to build your team on that foundation, yeah, they're going to miss some games. It's going to happen, but you're taking care of almost every category in a big, strong way right out of the chute, with maybe the possible exception of threes. And we know we can make up for those later on because you're so powerful in those two things. On the flip side of that, guys in the early rounds that make less sense for Roto are the guys that are getting drafted earlier because of their durability. Domantas Sabonis, Anthony Edwards are guys that I don't know that they clear the top 20 on a per game basis, but they're getting drafted around 13 or 14 because head-to-head players feel really comfortable that they're going to give them 75 games. And I agree with that. I think they probably do give a pretty good chunk of games played this year, But again, in Roto, what you want are the guys that are giving you the biggest possible stats for each game they use against your game's cap. And what I hope I'm doing with this sort of circuitous answer to your very straightforward question is teaching people the difference in how you draft for different formats. Pascal Siakam, better target in head-to-head. LeBron, actually, better target in head-to-head. Kawhi, Jimmy Butler, those guys, better targets in Roto as you work your way through the second, third round. Miles Turner, Kristaps Porzingis, great targets in Roto. Vooch, actually, I think probably an example of someone that could make sense on both sides. But you're looking for these guys that where you draft them, you feel like their per game is not what you're at all worried about with them. Now, you can't take an injury-prone player in every single round. At some point, you're just going to fall too far behind in games played. So you can't go Anthony Davis, Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard, Kristaps Porzingis, because now you're getting 60 games apiece out of your top 4 picks. But you can do it in 2, maybe even 3 of those, and you just don't have to worry about it the same way because you're piling up all of these unbelievable per-game statistics. A couple of guys that are a little bit more durable that I think are falling too far in the mid-rounds. They're largely centers. I think Walker Kessler is going a little bit too deep right now after he was getting drafted in the 30s. He got dropped down to the 50s in Yahoo's latest rearrange. Nick Claxton is kind of in that same bucket as someone who we know on a per-game basis is likely to beat his mark, as is Jared Allen. I think Tyrese Maxey is destined to have a really good year because we're hearing that James Harden has no intention really of hanging out. And I think banking on some Portland Trailblazers to take a nice step forward is also a pretty good move because, yeah, maybe you get stuck with a little bit of drama at the beginning of the year, but Jeremy Grant, Anthony Simons, these guys are going to play. I'm not that worried about Scoot taking all of the usage away from them, especially not at the beginning of the year. And in Roto, because your stats accrue over the entire season, somebody who comes out of the gate really strong and maybe fades a tiny bit at the end of the year doesn't hurt you in a way that in head-to-head, you're often looking for guys that start slow and finish stronger. That's another cool thing about Roto where I'm almost done, I promise. Thinking about the Utah Jazz last year is a great example of this, where you could have sort of bought in on Mike Conley and Kelly Olynyk and these older guys playing a lot the first half of the year. In head-to-head, those guys aren't getting drafted because everybody was worried about shutdowns, and reasonably so. In Roto, you can just take those guys and cash in for the first 3 months and then drop them halfway through because everything they did for you those 3 months is still a part of your rankings as the season goes on. And that is the end of a very long speech on a very short question. I'm so sorry for talking that long.
No apologies needed. You know, I'm all about the value. So like that is a lot of nuggets. And I know you have a show to do in a little bit. So why don't we just take a minute to have you share, you know, what's coming up next for you, what's going on in Sports Ethos on your podcast, and also share with the folks your information so they could contact you or find you online.
Well, I was hoping that the video would take care of that, but as you can see, my camera is still on the fritz. I tried, I failed. I'm so sorry about that. But you can find me on Twitter at Dan Besbris. It's DanBesbris. I hope folks will listen to Fantasy NBA Today. Everybody knows I love Roto, but I do cover both formats on that show because you have to. You can't just the more times I yell about Roto, I hope that I convince like 1% to 2% of my listeners to try it every single year. But head-to-head is still the dominant format of fantasy. So we'll cover all of that stuff. And right now, we're going in depth on drafting. This is a punt week on the show. We're teaching everybody how to punt different categories. And then Sports Ethos is growing. If anybody is interested in being a part of what we're doing over there, we got Ethos Leagues. We're always looking for contributors. It's a really fun time of year, this ramp up. Dude, we're under 4 weeks from opening night. Can you believe it?
It's crazy. I'm so excited. It's like I got a countdown timer. I'm like ready to go.
I wish I had a countdown timer. Although sometimes it's fun for me to look at the calendar. You know, I got a couple of kids. Everybody hears me talk about them on my show. You kind of lose track of what day it is when you're just like frantically trying to make sure your 2 children are alive and doing the right things every day. And then sometimes you like blink twice, look at the calendar and realize, holy crap, it's October in 4 days. What a great feeling, man. It's been a long off season.
It really has. It really has. And I think for me, just trying to create content in the off season for me, because I didn't really do that in seasons past. And I really like watched you and Josh Lloyd and like how you were consistent pumping out content. So that's the thing that kept me going. It's just like kept me researching, kept my mind fresh. So I'm super grateful for you for that.
Oh, well, I will say it's hard. There are some days you wake up and I think I may have even said it on my show, but there are definitely some days I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, what in the crap am I going to talk about on today's podcast? And I open x.twitter.com and I just am like praying that some weird NBA news broke and I can do a show on that, and it never does. But then you just dig deep, man. You just dig deep. You figure something out and you talk about it. And as a former play-by-play guy, I do love the sound of my own voice, and I'm not afraid to admit that because I'm an unabashed narcissist. So sometimes you just start doing a podcast and you just listen to yourself yammer for 20 minutes, and then you turn off the recording equipment, and I walk away thinking, well, that was a horrible show. But you got to do it, man. Sometimes you just put out a bad one.
Well, listen, let me say before you go, that there were a couple of times in my journey as a listener of your show that you were kind of helping to carry me through. So I just wanted to make sure I let you know that. And hopefully I could do the same for someone. So for example, when the pandemic hit, you know how that was.
Oh, man.
So we were in the middle of fantasy season. So I was listening to you, Josh, some of the other guys, Round Ball Stew with Zach, and just like listening to my normal, flow of shows. But then when that happened, it kind of changed the conversation. So that's one moment. And another moment that you were there was when Kobe passed away. So when Kobe passed, like that, again, that was another moment where we were like, because it was all like, Kobe passed and then the pandemic hit. So it was just a different moment for listeners. So I just wanted to make sure I gave you some flowers on that and let you know that although it is hard and we wake up and do this thing, that you're impacting people. And I'm a testament to that.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. That means a ton. Just thinking about the Kobe week, but like I can still feel the hairs on my neck stand up a little bit. It was I didn't know that I would be as impacted by that as I was, but I'm an Angelino. I've spent the vast majority of my life in LA, but he was a persona that was a worldwide persona. But there was just something about, I think it was the fact that you had the kids on the helicopter too.
Yeah. And you're a dad. So that's one of the things with me. Like I was like looking at my kids like, oh my God. I didn't believe it. Like my doorman told me, we were leaving our apartment in New York City and he was like, Kobe died. I was like, Kobe who? And I just couldn't believe it. And just brutal, man.
I don't know if this happened to you, but when I was younger and I didn't have kids, I was able to do a really good job of just like pretending bad news didn't exist. And I can't do that anymore. Yeah. Everything that happens in the world, I'm just like, what if that happened to my children?
Yeah.
And I don't want to be that guy who's like, you don't understand this until you have kids, but I didn't. So I can, as a testament to myself, I can say I didn't feel these things until I had children. And now like I watch movies, which is not real, and kids are sick in movies, and I'm looking at it like, oh, that's awful. And I can't separate reality from fake anymore because everything just goes back to like, what if this happened to me? Life was easier when I could ignore all of these things. But thank you for saying that. That means a ton. And the pandemic was a brutal time for all of us, and like just anything that we could find to talk about. It was a nice break for me too, actually, to get on and do shows, even if I was just looking at like covidactnow.org and trying to find out if I was going to be safe going to the market that week. That was an absolutely insane time.
So thanks for helping getting us do that. And I'm looking forward to connecting with you on a future show and spending some more time chatting.
Oh my God. Absolutely, man. You name it.
All right, Dan, I'll let you run to your show and I'll close out. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. That was amazing. Thank you for hanging with my very silly time constraints. Thanks everybody for listening and watching. I'm sorry about my webcam.
All good. Thank you, Dan. Wow. Do you listen? I always talk about value. So like, I'm not the Roto guy. I'm just not the Roto guy. So what do? I bring you the Roto guy to make sure that you can get the knowledge that you need. Some people are signing up for leagues and they don't even know what kind of league they're signing up for. Then you find out it's a Roto league and you're like, what's a Roto? Like Roto Rooter, like Roto, right? But we got you the information you need. Now that you know all about Roto leagues, play the waivers, set your lineups, and check out our next episode about punting in category leagues. This episode was presented to you by Bet Online, where the game starts.